But what about that like really not sexy stuff of like how do you actually get it done? Like the actual implementation. Because our organizations are scaled systems that are tuned to do what they do today. And how do we shift that system to a different way of operating and thinking? And it was a really interesting juxtaposition, but I loved that combination of my academic work and being in the real world. And leaving the ivory tower to say, how do we actually make change? How do we actually bring things to life with the people all around us? And how do we surround ourselves with just incredible people? But I think about the fact that you and I did not wake up this morning as an employee, right? None of us woke up as a customer. And I think sometimes we forget that we are fundamentally just humans. And a lot of the different issues that hopefully you and I'll cover in this conversation do come back to how do we kind of show up authentically? How do we acknowledge with empathy each other's fundamental kind of human qualities? So I do think the rise of technology is reflecting more upon us about our humanity. And then I think there is a question about what do we want the humans to do and what do we want the bots to do? And is it just another tool, just like we're using lots of tools to even have this conversation today? And does it enable more human connection, which I would love? Or does it disintermediate us, where my bot's writing my email, your bot's reading my email and sending a response? Like, how much disintermediation do we want? And how satisfying will that feel when we kind of know, Volcker and Amelia aren't actually having a conversation. Their bots are having a conversation.
First of all, thank you for listening to our EX Steps podcast, and apologies that I interrupt this episode. I promise I keep it short, but it's quite important and I need your help, please. I've been publishing these podcast conversations for 2 years now, and I see from the statistics that many of you are listening to my podcast on Spotify or Apple, and some of you are watching on YouTube. Thank you for that, and I hope you enjoyed the episode so far. I plan on making more episodes, but in order to do so, as I'm a one-man show, I would like to ask for your help, please. It doesn't cost you anything except for maybe 1 minute of your time. Please subscribe to my podcast on Apple or Spotify and subscribe to my YouTube channel. With your subscriptions, I will be able to reach more listeners, which in turn helps me get further interesting guests for you to listen to. So if you will, it's a win-win. Subscribe, and if you want, you can also leave a like or a comment, or tell me if there's anyone you want me to speak to in one of my episodes. Thank you so much for your support, and now let's start the next episode. What is a strategy theologian? And what does this have to do with employee experience? And why is thinking and focusing on employee experience good but not enough? And how does trust fit into all of this? Welcome to another Employee Experience Labs podcast from the Munich Podcast studio. Employee Experience Labs podcasts are about HR tech, employee experience, shared services, and other interesting topics around HR at the work. We continue our most successful season so far from the Workbook of an HR leader, where I'm talking to experienced colleagues in our field about their daily working routine and what and how they are going about the various challenges they have to face each day. I'm a tireless believer that we can all be better if we learn from each other, but there are not many opportunities to actually do that. Yes, there are conferences, but how often can you attend one in a year? Yes, there are peer-to-peer connections, but how many do you manage to keep running? I'm a firm believer that we can all do a better job if we learn from each other, and so I am inviting seasoned HR experts from various fields and companies to tell us about their workday and how they go about the challenges of the day. Today is a special episode, as I'm talking to someone that is probably even more excited and energized by experience than I am, and someone that loves her job maybe even more than I love mine. Well, judge for yourself when you listen to my conversation with Amelia Dunlop, Chief Experience Officer at Deloitte Digital. Amelia and I have only met last year, but our excitement for experience and our passion to spread the word got us together. We've tried to book some time to talk about experience already last year, but our calendars made it impossible. And so I'm really excited that we have spoken at the beginning of this year. What I really like about Amelia is that she combines real-world application and research in her work. With this, she lays important groundwork for experienced practitioners like me we can utilize in our daily. And as she as a practitioner herself, it is also proven in the real work life. We talked about identity, transformation, AI, and what big questions around AI we as experienced practitioners now need to ask and find answers. We covered quite a wide field, but also went very deep. Listen for yourself to Amelia Dunlop, Chief Experience Officer at Deloitte Digital.
Welcome. Hi, Amelia. It's so great to see you. It has been some time that we met face to face, and of course, it has been some time that we had a chance to connect because of Christmas, holidays, New Year's break. But it's good to see you again.
Good to see you
How
too.
are you? How have you been?
I am well. I'm well. Happy New Year to you.
Thank you. Yes, you too.
And to friends watching. Doing well. It is cold, very cold here in Boston.
Yes.
Got something of that little Arctic sort of winter going on. But we're staying warm and looking
That is
forward to this
good.
conversation with you.
Yeah, and I hope you stay warm and stay safe. I've seen the news. It's massive, but yeah, I hope you stay warm. Amelia, as I said, it's so great to have you. But before we go into the weeds of what we both love, experience, right? Human experience. We get there in a second. Before we get there, who is Amelia Dunlop? What is your background? What did you study? What did you work? What are your experiences? How did you get to where you are today? And where are you today?
Oh my goodness, that's a lot of questions. Okay.
Yes.
I'll start with present day Amelia. So present day Amelia, I am the Chief Experience Officer at Deloitte Digital. And as you know, Volker, I love my job. I love that I get to wake up every day and thinking about how do we make experiences just a little bit better. And you've already referenced it, but I very much think about it in terms of the human experience, right? So we can talk about employees for sure. We could talk about customers. We could talk about partners. But I think about the fact that you and I did not wake up this morning as an employee, right? None of us woke up as a customer. And I think sometimes we forget that we are fundamentally just humans.
Yeah.
And a lot of the different issues that hopefully you and I will cover in this conversation do come back to how do we kind of show up authentically? How do we acknowledge with empathy each other's fundamental kind of human qualities? And so then if I go into the way back machine of like, how did I get here to having this conversation with you today? I guess my academic background is in the field of sociology. I have a degree in sociology. I also have a master's degree in theology. So I like to
Wow,
say,
I did not know that.
I know it's one of those things where I like to say I'm one of the very few strategy theologians you will ever meet. And I think that sort of academic background in sort of questions of meaning and purpose and ultimacy about human nature has fueled, right? You'll sort of hear some of that. You'll see some of that in my own work and writing. So yes, I have degrees in theology, sociology, and then I also have my MBA. So that's my sort of academic kind of foundation. And then career-wise, you can picture it. I was a sort of young theology student, and I stumbled into a summer internship with the Monitor Group, a management consulting firm here in Boston, Massachusetts. And it was a really interesting juxtaposition, but I loved that combination of my academic work and being in the real world. And leaving the ivory tower to say, how do we actually make change? How do we actually bring things to life with the people all around us? And how do we surround ourselves with just incredible people? So that's been my career journey, and my sort of areas of expertise is really focused on strategy and how do we make good choices, and innovation, and how do we kind of drive growth? How do we create experiences that people could just possibly love? And so that's sort of the academic background. And then I've, held various roles over the years as a partner at Deloitte. I run our strategy and innovation practice. And now, as I said, present day Amelia, I get to wake up every day thinking about the human experience.
And Amelia, thank you. You are basically having a bit of a double role, right? You're thinking about experience for Deloitte, but you're also talking a lot about the human experience to to potential customers, others out there that looking after the experience, people like like me, for example, right? This is how you and I met. How did this come to play that you are playing this interesting double role, and how does this feel for you?
Right. Well, I like that you call it a double role. It is not a double life. It is a double. Hey, I think the way I think about it is, yes, I have, a team. I do a lot of research and I do a lot of work. I'm as a management consultant, right? I help our clients do this work around creating better experiences for their
Mm,
employees and their customers. But I very much believe, and you know this about me, that to do that authentically, I also have to do that for
mm,
ourselves here at Deloitte.
mm,
And so that's why I feel like it's that 50-50 balance where we can talk a lot about the work we do for our clients on behalf of the peers like yourself who are leaders in the field of experience. But then also I feel like there's a I don't know, there's this, like I said, authenticity to we're doing it here. Like I understand
yeah,
the struggle is
yeah,
real, right? We can have
yeah, yeah,
fabulous ideas about what we can do to create better experiences, but that idea has to survive through execution.
yeah.
And so I actually love that I get to do that both for ourselves.
Your
Um,
own private lab.
well, I mean, and also it gives me a ton of empathy, right, for just how
Yeah,
hard it is to create that kind of meaningful change.
yeah. It's amazing. I think this is really great having this combination. And I hear you when you say that you love your job and you love to come to work every day, because this is truly at the heart of being human, right? And looking at us all humans in that very specific way is something that you and I both believe we should do more of. Um, but there's also so much more to learn to do that right, and to to get it right. And so having the chance to do research, to test something out, and then also go out is really amazing. When you think about a bit of how much time do you spend like internally, how much
Mm.
time do you spend externally, how does this balance out for you?
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where, like you, I think about this as it's 50-50, right? But
Mm.
that assumes everything adds up to 100%. Where,
Yes.
um, I that's probably not fair. What I find is one fuels the other, right? So oftentimes we'll have conversations. I'll meet fellow experience officers, like I did. I had
Yeah.
a great conversation over lunch yesterday, and they'll ask questions. They'll sort of put out, what are the issues, what are the things that they're thinking about, and then I'll be doing the same for ourselves here at Deloitte. And then my night job is I love to do the research. I love to do the reading. I love to kind of be grounded in the sort of what is it that would actually advance the field. Right? What
Mm.
is it? For example, one of the questions I was contemplating just last night was there are so many now new leaders focused on the role of experience, again,
Mhm,
whether
mhm,
employee or
mhm.
customer, but there's such a wide diversity of what's considered included in the role. Right? So one of the
Mm.
things I'm thinking about now is, okay, so what are just like, marketing was a field that emerged, over the last several decades. It's settled down, right? There's some
Yeah,
known capabilities that you need
yeah.
to be a high quality marketer. I'm thinking now more about what are those capabilities that are required to be, excellent at the craft of experience.
Oh,
So that
interesting.
that would be an example where
Yeah,
the
the
internal work and the
cross-pollination,
external work
yeah.
fuel each other.
It is very interesting. Let's just jump right in there, Amelia, if you don't mind. So thinking about experience, it's a developing field, as you said. It's not yet mature. It is still a developing role. But when you would talk about it today, let's say, the elevator speech. How would you define experience, and what makes or forms such an experience for you? How would you describe that?
Ooh, I love how you get straight to the hard questions.
Yes.
So how do we define an experience? I mean, I think maybe I'll tackle it this way. So as you know, I wrote my first book on elevating the human experience, right? And so each of those words means quite a lot to me. And I sometimes get asked, well, is that a personal book? Is that a professional book? And the answer is yes, right? So elevating the human experience is a fundamentally human issue. Um, and in there, I talk about what does it mean to show up at work in a way that we feel
Mm,
worthy of love.
mm,
And I know that's provocative, right? And that was sort of part of my intention. And I talk about that we need a new definition of what it means to love, right? Because it immediately calls to mind all the things that makes us feel provocative or potentially uncomfortable or sensitive in the workplace. But I offer a definition of love, which is much more grounded in the willingness for me to show up for both myself or for another, and invest
yeah,
in their growth and invest in their
yeah,
flourishing.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so, like, that for me is the fundamental issue of what does it mean, to elevate the human experience.
Experience.
And so if I come back to it, I was once asked after that book came out, "Well, Amelia, how would I know if I'd done that? How will we know if we've elevated any experience?" Right? And this kind of comes back to your question. And the answer is, I think we will flourish. And
Mm,
flourishing is a fundamentally individual experience, right? So my flourishing is different than your flourishing. What combination of factors will contribute to your flourishing in the workplace are going to be different than the ones that will contribute to mine. But it really is that lived experience. And for me, feeling is a very important part of experience because experiences aren't just intellectual, right? And so much of our corporate world sort of focuses on the intellectual and the quantifiable. I think an experience really does include that which is felt.
mm. There were two things just came to mind when we were talking about this. Um, have you ever had the chance to talk or read the book from Marcus Buckingham, Love Plus Work, Work Plus Love, I
Yes.
think it was
Yep.
called. Yeah,
I mean, obviously, when I was doing my research, yes,
yeah.
absolutely. And he and I have
That
had
is,
he and his co-author and I have had conversations as well.
yeah. That's very close, right? And when you then think about this, the second that came to mind is this flourishing. You could argue, and this comes a bit to my next question, but I was just thinking conceptually. You could say that this is, this experience, and having this experience, being able to flourish, this goes directly into engagement, and where you then come into this so-called flow in your work, right? This um, which is actually where I wrote my book about.
Yeah, exactly. So see, this
But
is what
yeah,
you and I have such
yeah,
fun having in these conversations. No,
very
I would
interesting. Yeah.
that's a good point. I haven't thought so much about how when we feel like we're flourishing, it is the feeling of flow, right? It is that feeling of we are doing work that is personally meaningful, that is in some way acknowledged, it's contributing to our growth. Yeah, no, I think I'd like that a lot.
And bringing this then a bit further, you could argue, and both you and I are not on that direction, but you could argue this whole experience topic, looking at a person from a human perspective. Why should we do this? What's the business deal about that? This is just a nice to have, and we don't have time or money to do that. When you get into this conversation with companies, how would you tell them that they are on the wrong direction, and that actually they need to think about this from a business perspective?
I know, I love the provocative question. I would say the first thing that I find is there are very few people who would argue that human experience doesn't matter, right? Because you kind of do like, well, intuitively, whether pick your own experience. You have children, you
Mm,
have aging parents, you've had a life experience, you've suffered. Like suffering is a fundamental part of the human condition. So it doesn't actually take, I find, that much to convince a fellow individual like, no, human
yeah,
experience matters, right? So that I
yeah,
find baseline we can kind of tend to agree upon. But I think to your point, how much should it weigh in all the other
yeah,
factors that go on with
yeah.
prioritization in a corporate workplace,
Mm,
right?
mm,
And I think that's an important question because corporate workplaces, they have to be profitable in order to survive,
yes.
right? Like we all get that. That is the capitalist society in which we operate. And so then I think the more nuanced question is, how much does it matter in that context, right? Where we're making hard, difficult trade-off decisions all the time as business leaders. And that's where I do a lot of research, right? Because I too am curious, right? I have a hypothesis that it
Yeah.
matters,
Yeah.
but as a social scientist, I want to go back and make sure we understand how do we value it appropriately, right? Not too much and not too little. And one of the things that I just did for our own organization was I took a look at client experiences that we offer, a wide range of them, and how that correlates to our own growth in our own business. And we had a hypothesis that it did. We went and tested it with over 1,000 of our different accounts. And we are able to prove that when we're offering, these kind of what we call signature experiences for our
Yeah.
clients,
Yeah.
it does have a very strong positive impact on the growth of our business. And then we actually ran the regression the other way, right? We should have said, well, but if we have a growing area, doesn't that mean we're more likely to have clients who are willing to come to events or experiences we might offer? And the answer is no. Like, that's a weak correlation. So this is where I feel like being able to use the data, run some of these experiments to say exactly how much should we value it, exactly how much should we weight it, knowing that intuitively it matters. But we do, we are sort of evidence-based. We're all looking for data. So how can we use that data to make better and more informed choices?
Yeah. But you're still basically also on the holy grail that we see in the engagement space as well, where you say, like, yes, we have multiple studies where we say increased engagement and increased productivity correlate,
Right.
but not yet sure about the causality of that is one or the other or whatever. But on the experience, it's similar. We have a good correlation between experience and productivity.
Right.
Causality is a different. In research, causality is anyway
No, of course.
very different.
I mean, and you're right.
topic.
That's where the journey that I think we're all on is, whether it's client lifetime value, employee lifetime value, this idea of that it matters, right? And how do we start to get more refined instrumentation such that we can acknowledge that investing in a relationship, investing in an employee in a way that's kind of puts them in an environment such that they're in their flow and they feel like they're flourishing, that has a lifetime value to an organization.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I agree. We're not there yet, but that is the journey that we're on.
And when you then think a bit detailing the RA a bit more, I would say, maybe you prove me wrong, but I would say customer experience officers have a bit of a easier way to identify the RI because they are very closely related to the sales, right? So you have a very good mechanism there. But when you think about employee experience officers that focus on the internal employee, which ROI measures do you see or would you suggest are working there to build the case?
Right. Well, and this is where, in my very non-scientific way, I often just say that I do believe that the whole field of customer experience is about 10 years ahead of the field of employee experience.
I
And
would not
that's
disagree. Yeah.
right. And it's just it's just a round number, but it's the idea of our willingness to invest in, experiment, apply latest tools in AI, the ability to see a closer relationship between experience and kind of financial outcomes, right? I wouldn't say, to your point, not as always a direct, but closer relationship. So I do agree that it's harder from an employee perspective because you're always looking at leading or lagging indicators, right? And you're trying to make the case for how one particular measure is going to drive retention or motivation to work or willingness to refer to a friend. And those are very challenging metrics when you try to compare them to sales, right?
Yeah. It's
And I think
it's very hard fact versus soft fact, right?
right, and I do think that the data science is improving, and I do think the ability to use AI and look at much larger, unlike data sets, right? To be able to say, let's dump all longitudinal data in and query it. That I think is going to help evolve the field. But I will say this fundamental challenge is one of the reasons that Ashley Reicheld and myself, really focused on the topic of how do you build trust. So we did the work on elevating the human experience to say, you can't elevate anyone's experience if they don't trust you. So again, this is a human issue. This is not an employee issue or a customer issue. This is just a human issue. And Ashley and her team did just years of research around what are those factors that are going to promote trust more quickly, right? And
Yeah.
also trust in a virtual environment where
Yeah.
it's very different than sitting down together and having a cup of tea than it is to kind of have a conversation and meet someone over a video. So that's really what led to this research around the 4 factors of trust, and just how we can more intentionally build those into particularly things like our employee relationships. So that is what led to that second book.
Fantastic. Before we go to that book, I mean, let me stay, if you don't mind, a minute or so more on experience, because there's something else I wanna talk to you about in that space, and understand a bit more your rationale. You have founded, I think, the first or the only human experience advisory board where you bring different experience officers with different focus areas of experience, but also different interpretations of that role together. How did you get to building that?
It's so funny, Volker. I feel like I created it because I needed it, right? No, to be totally honest.
Yeah.
In
Don't be so selfish.
Well, I don't know. It can be very lonely to be
Yeah.
exploring a field,
Yeah.
convincing your colleagues, convincing your teammates that it matters, that it's a real thing, that it's, that it has an impact. And so I found myself reaching out to basically the senior most experienced leaders in other organizations to say, well,
Yeah.
don't tell me any secrets, but what challenges are you facing?
Mm.
Right? Or how have you tackled this issue? Right? Or how are you thinking about the ways in which technology does or does not improve the experience? And it became very clear early on that there's a pretty common set of issues that organizations are facing as they try to think about being more customer or more employee focused. And we could all learn from each other, right? So that's really why I created the Human Experience Advisory Board. And it's really grown over time to include both customer leaders and employee leaders,
Yeah.
and leaders like yourself, who I'm really, really glad to be in conversation with.
No, thank you so much for the invitation. I really enjoyed it. And to be honest, you call it human experience, and you have practitioners from the multi different focus sites, as I said. I was a bit skeptical around that at the beginning, but attending and hearing their topics, their thoughts, their successes, their challenges, it really is a more fundamental conversation around experience that I really like, and I would not have thought it works in the broader sense way. So this is really was an eye opener for me.
Oh, well, thank you. And I appreciate that. And I do think every so often about, well, we could easily separate, right? We could have forums
Yeah.
just for employee experience or forums just for customer experience and maybe come together occasionally. But I'm also aware that we learn the most from our weak ties, right? So if we just focus narrowly in one area, we'd probably all self-reinforce pretty quickly. And I think there is something about opening the aperture a little bit wider to say, how are you seeing this orthogonally? How are you seeing this a little bit differently that we
Yeah.
might learn from each other?
Yeah, and I think there's also what you said earlier, me being very selfish now. The customer experience field is way more advanced than the employee experience field. So selfishly, I can learn so much from that side on things that work, things that don't work. That's amazing. So for me, it's brilliant.
Thank you. Well, I've enjoyed having you as part of the conversation.
No, thank you. What when you think about the board, Amelia, did you build it then for mainly the purpose of doing some research as well as exchanging ideas and challenges in a safe space, or any other goals that you have with this advisory board?
Yeah, I think the goal of the advisory board has always been, I would say really three things. I mean, one, the bar is pretty high. If you're going to bring together a bunch of experience officers, you got to create an
Hmm.
experience. So part of it is let's just make sure that there's a thoughtfulness to
Mm.
how we spend our time together, right? And so creating an experience that feed back to each of us as individuals. So like that's almost like the primary thing, right? Then I'd say the second thing is who's in the room, right?
Uh-huh.
And that's the next thing where you'll get the most value just out of those, who you're going to meet, who you can have a conversation with, you can exchange those ideas with. Nothing that we could ever plan, right, or
No,
orchestrate,
yeah.
and then the third one is let's make sure we're always trying to bring some fresh idea, some fresh piece of
Mm.
research, or something that feels like this is a chance to look at some idea together and have a conversation about it. So those are always been the three. Um, One of the things that we're just starting now is to say now that the board has grown in size, I want to sit down with each of our members and really get a little bit more so that formally in terms of research with the
Mhm.
group, because I do think there's a responsibility to advance the practice and advance the field. And so, how can we do that together?
Amazing. Yeah, I'm looking forward to the next one, and
Coming soon.
I'm ready to book and come over to probably will be New York next time, or where
Yeah.
will
So
you
our
go?
next one is actually going to be virtual in February, so that'll be super
Yeah,
easy.
that's a
And
super easy
then
one.
and then
Yes.
we'll figure out where we will next meet in person.
Oh, fantastic. Looking forward to that. Now, Amelia, you already started talking about your latest book that you co-authored around trust, and as you said, trust and experience are very closely interrelated. Um, the four factors of trust that the book actually figured out. Tell us more about this. How did you arrive at those four factors, and how did you arrive at the decision to actually write a book about it?
Right. Well, so actually, I'll start with that, which is I wanted the first line of our book to be "The world doesn't need another book on trust," and right, because there's a lot written, there's a lot of ink spilled on the topic,
There
right, and
is,
a lot of it's
yeah.
very academic and things that you and I would not necessarily pick up and read before bedtime. Um, but our editor counseled us to say maybe take that line out. But I think what really prompted it, as I've talked about, is we needed it. We as leaders
Yeah,
wanted something that worked for ourselves,
yeah.
and then obviously something that we could share with others. And Ashley and I talk about the fact that when we think about trust, we know that trust has been declining for the past 4 decades across every institution, and that's not the kind of world we want to live in. So that our aspiration really is about creating more of that world we want to live in. The organization
Mhm,
we want to be a part of is one where we trust each other, where we feel like we can flourish, where we feel like we could talk about
mhm.
what does it mean to invest in each other in a way that where we feel loved. That's the broader aspiration. I would say that's the why behind
Yeah,
that
yeah.
work.
I hope it works, to be honest, you know? It
Right? Like,
and I don't mean this, no, I don't mean this any negative way, but while you were saying it, I was reflecting on it. It is so true. Trust is eroding across each and every institution. I think though, if I have it right, the biggest, for whatever reason, the highest trust levels are still within organizations to the leadership teams of
yes.
of the organization, um, which I find fascinating. But it is it is sad that we are at that stage, right? That trust is so eroded, and yeah. So I was really like honestly thinking, yeah, I hope it helps. I hope we get there, right?
Yeah. And I
It's
think that is one of the reasons that the 4 factors of trust, our aspiration and hope would be it's open source, right? You can kinda go to the website, you can start to use them, um, because we know that it drives behaviors, right? So
mm,
when we focus on the factors, and you asked how did we get there? I mean, we just did the data science. You just run the regressions on millions of data points and kinda do the, "Okay, what are the factors that are driving behavior?" It's like, well, okay, there's 4, right? To what extent do you feel like this person is treating you with humanity, right? Showing up as a real person, authentically, treating you with kindness and respect, like pretty fundamental.
Yeah.
To what extent are they reliable? They kind of literally say
Mhm.
and do the same thing, right? There's no difference between what they say and what they do. Do they have the fundamental capability that they claim they do?
Mhm.
And are they offering it in a way that feels transparent with
Mhm.
all the relevant context? And those are the 4 factors that what I like about them is the simplicity and
Mhm.
the fact that even as you kind of listen and hopefully you kind of go through, it's like, okay, well, how am I demonstrating these 4
Mhm.
as I show up in any context, right? With
Yeah.
my
Yep.
team, with a peer, with a client, that uh, that extra dose of humanity and transparency is refreshing, and we all feel it.
Yeah. This is as you said, it's very simple. But on the other hand, when you think them through, it's also when you come to organizations, a change, and I think this is potentially also a bit of a generational conversation, but the human aspect showing up as oneself at work in an organization is a newer concept. I don't want to date us here at all, but I think when you and I started to work, that wasn't really there. There
Mm.
was a Amelia, and there was a work, you know,
Oh, yeah. Okay, I
self.
follow you in that. I think okay, so let's go back into the Wayback Machine, and I agree that we were taught that there was a professional identity self and
Yeah.
identity, and there was a personal self and identity, and those 2 should
Yes.
not really have much in common, right? That we kept one separate and distinct from the other. Um, and I mean, I just remember joining the workforce and thinking how strange that was. Like, you had to, like, every day kind of put on this mask and, like,
Yeah.
just as you kinda zipped up or buttoned up your suit, you're like, "Okay,
Yeah.
I am now officially,
Yeah.
professional Amelia."
Yeah.
And I didn't even really recognize the sound of her voice, right? We sort of put on it's the jargon, it's the things that we think we are expected of ourselves. And I think you're right. It would be interesting to look at the different milestones over, let's say, the past several decades. What has changed?
Not decades. We're not that old.
Okay, I mean, okay, years, fine. But
Yes. Yes.
but I do think, like, we could probably talk about some pivotal points. I do think in a sort of silver lining way, I think the pandemic that we all
Mm.
experienced in our respective communities had an impact. We
Yeah.
saw what was happening in each other's homes, right? Children walked by, spouses, partners,
Mm.
and suddenly you couldn't say, "Well, everything is fine," right? Because
Mhm.
everything might not
Mhm.
actually be fine, right? Our
Yeah.
health was in question and, the immediate families, and
And
that
people saw it, right? Because this invention of the virtual backgrounds that came much later.
right.
We didn't have them in the beginning.
Right. And I think that we had to have just much more sensitivity and empathy for you might not be your best self at work today for very, very real pressing reasons. And I just remember thinking, I don't want to ever go back. I don't want to ever go back to that you are just a work object and I am just a work
Mhm.
object.
Yeah.
We peeled behind the veil a little bit. And I think we also all felt some of that loss of connectivity that as
Mhm.
hard as it is to, commute into the office, we actually get something out of that. We actually get
We
something.
do.
I
Yeah.
talked about weak ties earlier. We get something about that just random chat you're going to have with someone you may never see again at a coffee shop,
Mhm.
right? And that is again, it helps remind us about what it means fundamentally to be human.
Yeah. I agree. I also have to say I don't want to change where we are, but it was a serious measure for me to unlearn and learn. Like really merging those two personalities, if you will, was an effort. It was not like from one day to the other because we were socialized in a very
That's a
different
good point.
way, right?
Right. Well, and then you could argue and I've done some of this research on Generation Z entering the workforce, right? And what's been distinctive about their entering the workforce during the time of the pandemic, um, you know, the limited apprenticeship available to them because they're not sitting
Mm,
next to their
yeah,
bosses and mentors and peers every
yeah.
day. So you could also argue that another thing that contributes to this blending of the personal and professional is the advent of social media. Also didn't
Mm,
exist.
yeah.
Um, when I started work. So I think there's a number of different factors that are kind of contributing to this focus on the whole person. I think another one that I'm fascinated by is the role of AI. So suddenly, when we can talk about what the bots can do, the question about, well, what do we need the humans for? Like,
Yeah.
what do we care for the humans? What do we need them for?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, becomes a question again, right? Where
What's
it
the differentiating factor? Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
And
So
quite frankly, and at least I am hearing from peers and confronted myself with the idea like, you know what? Do we need all of this stuff in the future? Do we need people running HR or experience departments, or can this all be done by AI? It's like, it's a fundamental misconception. I mean, actually, two. One is how much AI can actually do, and the other one is human. An AI, I don't think we want. Maybe it can. Let's not go there. But I don't think we want AI, whatever, being human in the connection way that other two, humanoids are, right? So
yeah, I mean, there's a lot there to explore. I do think about how the advent of increasingly intelligent and sort of human-like technologies does force us to reflect on what does it mean to be human. And I do think about how the field of human-centered design emerged with human-computer interface, right?
yes,
Well, we actually had to think about what does it mean for this human to interact with, a phone, an app, or what have you.
Hmm.
So I do think the rise of technology is reflecting more upon us about our humanity. And then I think there's a question about what do we want the humans to do and what do we want the bots to do? And is it just another tool, just like we're using lots of tools to even have this conversation today?
yeah,
And does it enable more human connection, which I would love?
mm.
Or does it make us, or does it disintermediate us where my
Mm.
bot's writing my email, your bot's reading my email and sending a response? Like, how much disintermediation do we want? And
Yeah.
how satisfying will that feel when we kind of know, Volker and Amelia aren't actually having a conversation. Their bots are having a conversation. And will there be a backlash to a more authentic human connection?
I think and hope there will be. If you ask me, this is the technology we have today is the right one and the best one to refocus on the human experience, to refocus on being human all around and take people as separate personalities and not their workforce or their customers, right? But they're individuals themselves. They're not only human, they're also human individuals.
Yeah, I like how you said that, both the idea that I think and I hope, because this is where I feel like it goes back to that sense of what kind of world are we creating? What kind of world do we want to live in? What kind of organization do we want to be a part of? So to the extent that you or I or anyone who listens to this podcast has a role where we can, help make change in our organization, what's the direction of travel? What are we pointing it towards? And my hope is that we would each be pointing towards one where we create better experiences for people every day.
Yeah, that's a good one. I can just put my signature under. That's absolutely. Coming back to the four factors. Amelia, when you how is the weighting between those factors? Are they all as important? Is one more important than the other? And if companies / teams want to start on that, where should they start? How should this look like?
Yeah, no, great question. So the way we looked at the four factors of trust is they all travel together, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I can't build trust with you just by being reliable, right? But
Mm-hmm.
maybe not demonstrating humanity, right? So
Mm-hmm.
like if I'm really low on one of the factors, it pulls them all down, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they travel in the same direction. But then what we also realized was um, it varies obviously across industries, but that there are factors that can help differentiate what we call the trust winners.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
trust is table stakes, right? Capability and reliability. We think about, when you think about the restaurant you want to go to, it has to have the food that you want and like actually deliver it to you in the way it said it was going to come to you. But you might go back to a restaurant where, the server treated you politely, right?
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
you understood exactly where the ingredients might have come from. So that's the sort of transparency and humanity. So what we've noticed is that the trust winners are not only delivering on the table stakes, but
Mhm.
are over delivering on some of the things that drive humanity and transparency.
Very interesting. That's very interesting. But it all makes sense. You said there's a difference on industry. Is there also a difference on, if you think within an organization, different functions like the finance function versus the marketing function, or is it like no, it doesn't make a difference what you are
Like which
doing?
function is no, that's an
Yeah.
interesting one. We've looked at the data a lot of different ways,
Yeah.
but I don't believe we've looked at the data by function to say, is finance more trusted than marketing, for
Mm.
example. What we have looked at is within an employee data set, who are the most trusting employees.
Mhm.
Do you have any guess on who they are?
I want to hope and say the HR employees.
I know, right? No, so what we found was when we looked at different demographics, like men versus women, different racial and ethnic identities, different levels of an organization, other sort of family status, that it's the more senior you are in the organization, the more you trust. Kind of intuitive, right? You have more
Mhm.
agency over the
Mhm.
organization. So tenure and seniority really
Yeah.
matter in driving trust. Men are going to trust more than women. And if you are in a sort of your socioeconomic, if you have children, you're also more
Mhm.
likely to be trusting. So those are some of the factors that are kind of say that we are the most trusting kind of audiences within the
Interesting.
employee population.
So quite frankly, I should be very trustful.
I mean, that sounds like you should be.
I'm I'm ticking those boxes.
You
Interesting.
do. You do.
But
But so then it makes
why
you then
men
reflect
more
on
than women?
why men more than women? Well,
Yeah.
this one was interesting. So we did look at that, and it turns out that men and women start out trusting at about the same levels early in their career, but then there's a pretty big gap, right? So women really don't start to kind of decline the more senior that they get, and that's again start to think about lived experience, start to think about when women do or do not feel like they are able to kind of show up fully in the workplace, that
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
starting to trust less the more senior they
Yeah.
are.
So quite frankly, now with the advent of being more oneself also in the workplace, the women can show themselves how they are much more today than yesterday, and hopefully this difference goes away in a few years.
I mean, that would be an optimistic view. I mean, I think about
I'm an optimistic
I
person. There
know
must be
that.
hope.
No, I know that. I know that. And I mean, I'm an optimist too. I am definitely an optimist too. But I will acknowledge that like if we need to talk about systems change then, right?
Yeah,
So an
yeah, we
individual
need
can
to.
change their mindset, their
Yeah.
perspective, and we all know how hard that is. We then have the opportunity to influence the couple of people around us in our
Mhm.
personal teams. But then we got to think about how whole systems change.
Yeah,
That,
it's a
that's
couple more
probably more than a
years.
few years, my friend.
Yeah, yeah, it's a yeah. No, we can't say decades because it doesn't age us how many
Right,
decades that will take. You know.
right.
Um. Uh, Very interesting, Amelia. I'm almost not almost. I am actually very sorry because we are slowly running towards end of the time that we have. But it's a very interesting conversation. Um, really insightful. Before I let you go,
Okay.
um, let's look a bit into the glass ball. We are at the beginning of the year. I think this is still in even double reason to look into that. You know, you are one of the biggest experts on experience with the research and the experience that you have, right? Where do you see that field of either human experience as a whole or employee experience more specific? Where do you see this in, like 5 years from now? What will it mean for businesses or in the business world? What will it mean for employees, and what will be different from today?
Here you are again with these hard questions. No, I love it. Okay. So we're looking at our crystal ball. I mean, I have definitely appreciated how rapidly the field has been emerging, right?
Mm.
And that's been a lot of fun. So if I were to say, let's say 5 years from now, I mean, we know that the role of experience officer has been one of the fastest growing in the C-suite. I would like to believe that that will be more solidified, 5 years
Mhm,
from
mhm.
now, where the scope of the role, the importance of the role, the measurement of the kind of success of the role will be very well understood. So that would be my
Mm.
aspiration for the role itself. But in terms of then what's on the mind of the experience officer, what are they grappling with 5 years from now? I'll tell you what I'm thinking a lot about is just just this idea of how do we transform mindsets
Yeah.
to kind of really create action. And the
Mm.
reason I go there is experiences, we have them every day, kind of,
Yes.
but with not much intention and intentionality. But if we're truly going to create something that is better, there's some
Mhm,
aspect of transformation.
mhm.
If we're going to do that, we need to tap into a mindset that says it's worth it. We could spend our time on it. We have the skills, like all the things that get at
Yeah,
mindset.
yeah.
And then fundamentally, we need to do something that creates action, right? This like
Yes.
an intellectual conversation about it isn't really
It's interesting, but doesn't have an impact.
no.
Yes.
And so I think if we want to be in the impact business, it really has to be the types of experiences that are going to create outcomes that, and then now I'll do the aspirational optimist part of me is that does make the world just a little bit better, right? Like we don't have like these grandiose aspirations, but if all we can do is, as I tell my children all the time, leave it better than when you found it.
Yeah. That is a big aspiration, but it's a nice one. Before we close, Amelia, thanks for the look into the future. Let's look into today. Experience officers you talk to today. What are the three biggest challenges that they tell you or that you see? And what is your approach to tackle them?
So you know that we've been leading the longitudinal research on chief experience officers, and the the first one really focused on the challenges, right? The
Mm.
challenges in the role, and we've been paying attention to how that's evolving over the years. And I think initially some of the biggest challenges really were about defining the role, and making the case, right? Making the case for the role and making the case for the budget and the team and the influence. So that's some of the early challenge, right? Then we saw a lot of the challenge around measurement, right? We got to
Mm.
prove that we have an impact, prove that there's a value there. So then there's the challenge of leading through influence, right? Because unlike, pick your favorite function that can kind of own the function all the way down in a vertical, experience by definition is horizontal.
Mm.
And so that I think will always be a trademark of
Yeah.
the field of experience, that it is one where you have to tap into hearts and minds and mindsets across an
Yeah.
organization. And that will always be a challenge.
Yeah.
I think, as we already talked about, there's a really big challenge around technology, right? And the sort of proliferation of technologies. Which are the right ones for our organization and our team? And then how do we create a human kind of interface with them? But then I'll leave you with the final one, which again was just a conversation with a peer yesterday.
Yeah.
Is but what about that like really not sexy stuff of like how do you actually get it done? Like the
Yeah.
actual implementation,
Yeah.
because our organizations are scaled systems that are tuned to do what they do today.
Yeah.
And how do we shift that system to a different
Mm.
way of operating and thinking? And that's the biggest challenge.
Wow. Thank you so much. Yeah. I
Thank
really
you.
I really enjoyed this conversation. I think I could, as usual, continue to talk with you hours and hours. But I want to be very respectful of the time that you gave me already. So Um, thank you so much for the great insights, for the great conversation. We will link out in the show notes to the two books that we talked about, to the webpage. so that folks can check it out. I can only recommend it. Thank you so much, Amelia.
Thank you. I very much enjoyed always our chat. So thanks for the invitation to speak today.
No, thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.